The Zenthari Academy of Exobiology did not accept failures. It did not graduate optimists. What it produced, with the mechanical precision of a species that had evolved from hive-mind philosophers, were scholars who understood that the universe was trying to kill everything in it, and the only question worth asking was, how slowly? Kairesh sat in the amphitheater. Calling it a classroom would be like calling a supernova a nightlight, her crystalline neural lattice already organizing the data before Professor Thelnix had finished materializing the holographic display. Around her, 200 of the galaxy's best exobiological minds settled into their various sitting, floating, or magnetically suspended positions. Final year. Capstone seminar. The culmination of 8 cycles studying how life clung to rocks that actively despised it. Today, Thelnix announced, her vocal membranes vibrating in the lower registers that meant this is important. Pay attention. We address the final examination. A collective stillness. Even the Mithara stopped their constant fidgeting. The hologram shifted, displaying a planet that looked like someone had taken every cosmic horror and compressed it into a single biosphere. Blue and white and green. Pretty, if you were stupid enough to ignore the readouts scrolling beside it. Case Study 847 Terran, the professor continued. Your task is conceptually simple. Design an organism capable of surviving here. You have 1 rotation. Kairesh's crystalline structure refracted light in patterns that meant intense concentration. She began parsing the data with the methodical precision her species was known for. Atmospheric composition first. 21% oxygen. She felt her thought lattice stutter. That was a corrosive agent. The planet's atmosphere was 1/5 poison. Is this a joke? That was Vorn, a Kellis whose exoskeleton was already shifting colors in agitation. Molecular oxygen in those concentrations would create an oxidative environment incompatible with most known biochemistries. Yes, Thelnix said. Her tone suggested she'd heard this response before, across many cohorts, and found it tediously predictable. Continue with the analysis. Kairesh did. Temperature range, 184 to 330 Kelvin. Planetary surface, 70% liquid water with dissolved minerals and salts. Tectonic activity, catastrophic. Magnetic field, fluctuating. Solar radiation, unfiltered across multiple spectra. Native microbial life, aggressive, mutagenic, and apparently engaged in some kind of microscopic warfare that made the Greth conflict look like a diplomatic negotiation. This is theoretical, correct? Asked Genval, whose species had evolved in the thermally stable caves of Praxis 7. No such planet could maintain complex life. The parameters are drawn from observational data, the professor replied, which was not quite an answer. Your hypothetical organism must not only survive but thrive. Bonus consideration for explaining. An evolutionary pathway. The amphitheater erupted into discussion. Kairesh formed a study cluster with 5 others, their various communication methods creating a symphony of clicks, chromatophore displays, and electromagnetic pulses. Start with the oxygen problem, suggested Mirlan, a Velcor like Kairesh, but from the southern lattice colleges. What if we design a biochemistry that uses it? Uses a corrosive agent as a primary metabolic component? Vorn's exoskeleton flashed incredulous purple. That's not biology. That's controlled explosive decomposition. But consider the energy yield, Kairesh interjected, her thoughts crystallizing around the problem. If an organism could harness oxidative reactions safely, the caloric return would be catastrophic to cellular structure, yes, we've established that. From somewhere in the back of the amphitheater, someone laughed. Not the polite academic chuckle of a species discovering an elegant solution, but the kind of laugh that suggested genuine, unhinged amusement. K-Fresh's visual sensors tracked the source, a figure in one of the private study alcoves, mostly obscured by environmental equipment. The breathing apparatus was notable, a full-face mask connected to what looked like a custom atmospheric processor. Transfer student, probably. Someone from a particularly fragile homeworld who needed specific conditions. The study groups continued their work, throwing increasingly desperate solutions at the problem. What if it lived underground? Genval proposed. Avoided the surface entirely? The data indicates seismic activity that would pulverize subterranean structures every few thousand rotations, Mirlan countered. And that's not even addressing the thermal vents, the liquid metal core, someone else supplied. This planet is geologically violent. Design something that moves, Vorn said. Mobile enough to escape disasters. With what energy source? Everything we've designed dies from oxygen toxicity before it can metabolize. The masked figure in the back was shaking now. Definitely laughing. Professor Thelnix noticed. Is something amusing, student? The amphitheater went quiet. The figure stood. Bipedal, K-Fresh noted, which narrowed it down to about 40 known species. Average height for a humanoid build. The environmental suit was high quality but not exotic. Sorry, Professor, the student said, voice modulated through the mask but still carrying an edge of suppressed hilarity. It's just, you're all approaching this wrong. Do enlighten us, Thelnix said, her membranes vibrating in a frequency that meant this should be entertaining. You're trying to design something that survives in spite of the conditions, the student continued, moving down the amphitheater steps with easy grace. But what if the conditions aren't hostile? What if they're optimal? K-Fresh felt her neural lattice reorganize around a new possibility. You're suggesting we reframe the parameters as beneficial rather than threatening? I'm suggesting, the student said, reaching the central platform, that you're looking at someone's normal Tuesday and calling it apocalyptic. Vorn's exoskeleton flashed skeptical orange. No known biochemistry could metabolize free oxygen at those concentrations without— Mine does, the student interrupted. The amphitheater could have been a vacuum for all the sound in it. The student reached up and began unsealing the breathing mask. K-Fresh's sensors went into overdrive, trying to catalog species by visible characteristics. The face that emerged was bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes, distinct nasal structure, visible auditory organs, dermal layer with pigmentation. My name isn't important right now, the student said, breathing the Academy's carefully balanced atmosphere with a slight grimace. What's important is that I'm from Case Study 847 Terran. A pause. You've been calling it Earth in your notes. That's my homeworld, Professor. K-Fresh would later calculate that the silence lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. It felt longer. Thelnix began, her vocal membranes producing sounds they probably weren't designed for. You're claiming to be from the theoretical Deathworld scenario? It's not theoretical, the human said. Because that's what she had to be. K-Fresh's crystalline mind supplied. A human, a species from the restricted files, the ones nobody studied because the data had to be corrupted. And it's not a death world, it's just— She gestured at the hologram, at the nightmare planet spinning serenely in the display. Home. Somewhere in the study cluster, Mirlan's thought lattice produced a single, perfectly formed question that echoed through their shared electromagnetic field. Then what in the name of the first scholars does that make her? The human smiled. K-Fresh noted the teeth. Clearly designed for mechanical processing of solid matter, probably omnivorous dietary requirements, and felt something that her species didn't have a specific term for, but that translated roughly to, oh, we have made a significant categorical error. So, the human said, turning to address the entire amphitheater, who wants to tell me what you've designed so far? because I have some notes. Professor Thelnix, to her credit, managed to produce sound. This, she said, is going to require recalibration of the entire curriculum. The human's smile widened. Professor, you have no idea. 3 cycles. The human had been attending Zenthari Academy for 3 full cycles, and not once, not during Introduction to Extreme Environment Adaptation, not during Advanced Chemosynthetic Processes, not even during the infamous seminar on theoretical limits of biological resilience, had she mentioned that her homework was describing her morning commute. Kairesh's crystalline neural structure was reorganizing itself so rapidly it bordered on painful. Memories surfaced. The human acing every examination on hostile environment survival. The casual way she'd dismissed Professor Velmoth's acclaimed thesis on atmospheric toxicity as interesting but limited in scope. That time she'd corrected the textbook on pressure tolerance with a handwritten note that read, "Visited Ocean Trench last summer break. Your math is off by a factor of 6. They'd thought she was being theoretical, ambitious, showing off with impossible edge cases. Wait, Vorn said, his exoskeleton cycling through colors so rapidly it created a strobing effect. Wait, you're telling me you've sat through 8 cycles of courses on Deathworld survival, and you're from... Technically only 3 cycles. I'm a transfer student, the human corrected. And they weren't all about Deathworlds. I took xenobotany too. Really interesting how you folks think plants work. Genval's cave-adapted vocal cords produced a sound like grinding rock. How we think plants work. Well, yeah. Your models don't account for seasonal variation, competitive resource allocation, or chemical warfare between species. The human shrugged, a gesture that involved her entire shoulder structure in a way that suggested significant skeletal flexibility. Most plants where I'm from are engaged in active chemical combat. Allelopathy, you'd call it, poisoning the soil so competitors can't grow. That's, Mirlan started, stopped, recalibrated. That's not plant behavior. That's strategic biological warfare. Sure, if you want to be dramatic about it, we just call it gardening. Professor Thelnix had moved to her data terminal, pulling up files with the kind of frantic energy that suggested her entire academic foundation was experiencing tectonic activity of its own. Your entrance application listed your homeworld as... She paused, vocal membranes fluttering in confusion. Unremarkable temperate planet. Standard classification 3B. No special atmospheric requirements. I mean, it is unremarkable, the human said. To me. You're the ones who turned it into some kind of mythological nightmare scenario. Kairesh accessed her own archives, pulling up every interaction she'd had with the human. Study sessions where they'd debated theoretical organism design. That time the human had sketched what she called a really basic predator, and it had teeth in concentric rows and ambush predation patterns that would make a Kresh hunting pack look like passive filter feeders. The assignment on extremophils, Kairesh said slowly, her thoughts crystallizing into horrified clarity. You wrote about organisms that could survive vacuum exposure, radiation bombardment, and temperatures that would boil metal. Tardigrades, yeah. They're like 0.5 millimeter long. Cute little things. The human pulled up her data pad, projecting an image that made several students recoil. 8 legs, segmented body, a face that suggested nightmare fuel had achieved consciousness. We call them water bears. That, Vorn said, is not bear-shaped. It's cuter than our actual bears. Those have claws that can... You know what? One horror at a time. Professor Thelnix was reading from the files now, her voice taking on the quality of someone narrating their own academic demise. Hydrothermal vent ecosystems supporting chemosynthetic life in superheated water. You cited them as comparable to terrestrial deep-sea environments. Because they are. We've got tube worms down there longer than I am tall, living around volcanic vents, no sunlight, no photosynthesis, just vibing in water hot enough to cook. She paused. Well, hot enough to cook most things in this room, actually. Genval made a sound like a structural collapse. Your planet has organisms that choose to live in boiling water? It's not boiling at that pressure. Physics, remember? The human's tone suggested she'd explained this before, possibly in an exam that everyone thought was theoretical. Although we do have stuff that lives in actual boiling springs. Thermophils, archaea, real simple organisms, been around for billions of years. Kairesh felt a thought pattern emerging that she didn't particularly like. When you say billions, Earth's about 4.5 billion years old. Life showed up maybe 4 billion years ago, give or take. The human said this the way someone might mention the weather. Had to survive a few mass extinctions, but that's how evolution works, right? Environmental pressure, adaptation, survival of whoever's stubborn enough to not die. The amphitheater had gone silent again, but this was a different quality of silence. This was 200 of the galaxy's finest scientific minds simultaneously recalculating everything they thought they knew about viable biospheres. Mass extinctions, Mirlan repeated. Plural. 5 major ones, bunch of smaller ones. The Permian-Triassic event killed like 96% of marine species. Really bad time for ocean life. The human scrolled through her data pad. But then stuff bounced back, evolved into new forms, and here we are. Your planet, Professor Thelnick said, and her vocal membranes were doing something that in any other species would be called hysterical laughter. Regularly experiences extinction-level events, and life just finds a way, yeah. That's kind of the whole point of evolution, isn't it? Vorn's exoskeleton had settled on a pale, shocked green. The oxidative atmosphere. You actually breathe that. Need it, actually. Oxygen's how we make energy. Cellular respiration converts glucose to ATP. Whole process would kill most of you folks, but it's how I'm standing here talking. The energy yield must be... Kairesh started calculating, stopped when the numbers became absurd. Pretty efficient, yeah. It's why we can do stuff like run for extended periods, maintain constant body temperature, heal from injuries. Oh, that's another thing your textbooks get wrong. Regeneration isn't theoretical. Every sensor in the room focused on her. The human held up her hand, extending one finger. Got a cut last week. Sliced it open on broken glass. That's silicon dioxide. Forms sharp edges when fractured. Drew blood, which is this red fluid that carries oxygen through our bodies using iron-based proteins. You have metal in your circulatory system, someone said faintly. Anyway, the blood clotted. That's a chemical cascade that solidifies the wound, and then the skin cells regenerated over a few days. Now look, she showed them the finger. Kairesh's sensors detected a slight variation in dermal thickness, a minor coloration difference. Healed. We call it a scar. Sometimes they fade completely. Genval's voice was barely above a whisper. You survive physical trauma and then... Repair ourselves, sure. Broken bones knit back together. Cuts seal over. We've got an immune system that fights off invasive microorganisms using specialized attack cells. It's extremely metal, if you think about it. Professor Thelnick had abandoned her terminal entirely. The theoretical models for case study 847 Terran included the possibility of megafauna. Large organisms, complex neural structures, potentially even proto-sapients. She looked at the human. How large? Well, I'm about average height for my species. But we've got whales in the oceans, mammals like us, that can be over 30 meters long. Land animals used to be bigger before we... She stopped. Before climate fluctuations, dinosaurs got pretty massive. Dinosaurs, Kairesh repeated, filing the word away for later research that she suspected would destroy her entire worldview. Extinct now. Asteroid impact, about 65 million years ago, made room for mammals to diversify, which eventually led to us. The human said this like it was a normal part of planetary development and not a catastrophic cosmic collision. Mirlan's electromagnetic field pulsed with a question that Kairesh suspected they were all thinking. If your planet regularly experiences catastrophic events, has atmospheric conditions that would kill most known life, hosts organisms engaged in chemical warfare and predation strategies that border on sadistic, and evolution proceeds through mass death and extinction cycles. He paused, recalibrating his query. What does that make your species? What survives that and develops sapience? The human's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile, but felt more like a warning. That, she said quietly, is actually a really good question. From the back of the amphitheater, near where administrative observers usually sat during important seminars, a figure stood. Kairesh's sensors identified the uniform. Military Intelligence, Galactic Defense Consortium. The officer had been auditing the class, standard procedure for advanced xenobiological studies. The officer was no longer taking notes casually. They were recording everything. The human noticed. Her smile became more pronounced, showing those omnivore teeth again. So, she said, addressing the room but looking at the military observer, who wants to hear about adrenaline? The human reached up and fully removed her breathing apparatus, setting it on the demonstration platform with a decisive click. Without the mask, her features were fully visible. Bilateral symmetry that most species found instinctively trustworthy, which in retrospect seemed like an evolutionary trap. First thing you should know, she began, inhaling deeply of the Academy's carefully regulated atmosphere, is that this air makes me slightly dizzy. You've got it optimized for 73 different species' respiratory requirements, which means the oxygen partial pressure is about 18% lower than I'm used to. Kairesh's neural lattice sparked with the implication. You require more of the corrosive agent? Back home I'd be breathing 21% oxygen at sea level. Here I'm getting, 14%? It's fine for sitting in lectures, but I wouldn't want to run a marathon in it. She paused. That's a long-distance endurance race. We do them for fun. Vorn's exoskeleton flashed a color that didn't exist in standard communication matrices, possibly his species' equivalent of existential confusion. You deliberately reduce your oxygen supply and then engage in extended physical exertion? As recreation? Builds cardiovascular efficiency. Although I guess the real answer is that we got bored and needed to challenge ourselves. The human stretched. Kairesh noted the range of motion in those shoulder joints, the flexibility of the spinal structure. Which brings me back to adrenaline. Professor Thelnix had regained some composure, though her vocal membranes still vibrated with barely controlled academic panic. Before you continue, I need clarification. You've been attending classes in a suboptimal atmospheric mixture for 3 cycles? Yeah, but it's not that bad. Comparable to high-altitude conditions back home. We've got permanent settlements at elevations where the oxygen is this thin. Millions of people live there, raise families, do normal stuff. She said this like it wasn't completely deranged. Your bodies would probably shut down, but we just adapt. Produce more red blood cells, increase lung capacity, recalibrate our entire respiratory system over a few weeks. Recalibrate, Mirlan repeated. You're describing physiological restructuring at the cellular level. Sure, but it's automatic. We don't think about it. The human pulled up her sleeve, revealing the dermal layer of her arm. Want to see something cool? Nobody responded, largely because nobody knew what cool meant in this context, and everyone suspected it would be terrifying. She produced a small implement from her supply kit. Kairesh's sensors identified it as a standard sample collection device, the kind used for tissue analysis. The human positioned it against her finger and activated it. A tiny puncture. A bead of red fluid welled up. "That's blood," she narrated, holding her hand up for the class to observe. "Hemoglobin-based, iron core, oxygen transport mechanism. Watch what happens." The amphitheater's collective sensor arrays focused on that single drop. The fluid was already changing, solidifying at the edges where it contacted air. The human's own atmospheric environment, treating her breach as an enemy incursion. "Coagulation cascade," she explained. "Platelets respond to the injury, release chemical signals, activate clotting factors in a sequential chain reaction. Fibrin proteins form a mesh, trap blood cells, create a temporary seal. Whole process takes maybe 15 seconds. The blood stopped flowing. A dark clot formed over the puncture. Genval made a sound like tectonic plates grinding. "Your body weaponizes its own fluids. I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. We just call it not bleeding to death from minor injuries." She wiped away the excess blood, revealing the sealed wound. "Give it a few days. This'll be completely healed. Won't even leave a mark." The military observer was speaking quietly into a communication device. Kairesh's auditory sensors picked up fragments. Self-repair mechanisms, combat applications. Need immediate classification review. The human noticed. Her expression shifted into something predatory. "Oh, you're going to love this next part then." "Vorn, you asked about adrenaline." Vorn's exoskeleton had settled into a pale, cautious yellow. "I'm not certain I did, actually. Adrenaline is what happens when we perceive danger," the human interrupted. "It's a hormone. Our adrenal glands dump it into our bloodstream, and suddenly everything changes." She began counting on her fingers. Heart rate increases, blood pressure spikes, pupils dilate for better vision. Glucose floods our system for immediate energy. Pain perception decreases. Reaction time accelerates. We get stronger. "You," Professor Thelnix said carefully, "have a biological mechanism that makes you more dangerous when threatened?" "It's a survival response. Fight or flight, we call it. Although honestly, humans tend to pick fight more often than our evolutionary ancestors probably intended." The human's smile was not reassuring. "There are documented cases of people lifting vehicles off trapped individuals, breaking through doors, fighting off multiple attackers. The strength was always there. Adrenaline just removes the safety limiters." "Safety limiters," Kairesh echoed. "You're saying your species has biological restrictions on your own physical capabilities?" "Have to. Otherwise we'd tear our own muscles, shatter our bones, damage our connective tissue. The limiters keep us from hurting ourselves during normal activities." She paused. "But when survival is on the line, the body decides that future damage is acceptable if it means living through the present." Mirlan's electromagnetic field pulsed with horror and fascination in equal measure. "You're describing a species that can consciously override its own safety protocols." "Not consciously, that's the thing. It's automatic, involuntary. We don't choose to activate adrenaline, it chooses us." The human leaned against the demonstration platform. "And that's not even getting into the other fun stuff. Fever responses where we literally cook invading pathogens by raising our body temperature. Immune cells that hunt down and destroy foreign organisms. The fact that we're colonized by trillions of bacteria that we've incorporated into our digestive process." Every species in the amphitheater recoiled. "You're colonized?" someone asked. "Symbiotically, our gut microbiome. We need them to process certain nutrients. They get a warm environment and steady food supply. It's mutualism." She said this like it was perfectly normal and not a description of being a walking ecosystem. Although when the balance gets disrupted, things can go wrong. Infections, diseases, immune responses. Stop, Professor Thelnick said. Just stop for a moment. Her vocal membranes were producing harmonics that suggested migraine-level stress. You're telling me that your species exists in a constant state of internal biological warfare, maintains populations of foreign organisms within your own body, and has emergency protocols that can make you stronger at the cost of self-damage? Yeah, that's basically human physiology in a nutshell. The human glanced at the military observer, who was now in animated conversation with what appeared to be a superior officer via holographic link. Although I feel like I should mention that we're not even the toughest things on Earth. There's this thing called a honey badger. No, Vorn said. Absolutely not. I cannot handle another Earth organism right now. Fair enough. Although you're going to have questions about sharks eventually, and I feel like we should address those proactively. The military observer stepped forward, cutting through the academic chaos with the authority of someone used to making decisions under pressure. Student, what clearance level is your homeworld classified under? The human blinked. I don't think it has one. Earth's been in the Galactic database for like 200 years. We've had diplomatic contact, trade agreements, the whole thing. Under what category? Developing world, standard protocol, non-interference until we achieve independent FTL capability, which we're working on. Should have it in another few decades. She looked genuinely confused. Why? The military observer exchanged glances with Professor Thelnick. Some kind of silent communication occurred, the kind that happened between professionals who just realized they were standing on a live munition. Because, the observer said slowly, nobody has been studying Earth as a developing world. We've been studying it as a theoretical model, a worst-case scenario, the kind of planet you'd use to test absolute limits of biological possibility. Right, I got that from the lecture. Case study. 847 Terran, final exam nightmare fuel, very dramatic. The human crossed her arms. But that doesn't explain why you're looking at me like I'm a military asset. Kairesh's crystalline mind formed a conclusion that she wished it hadn't. Because if the planet is real, and the organisms are real, and you're the sapient result of 4 billion years of evolution in those conditions. Then what? Mirlan finished, his electromagnetic field pulsing with the kind of dread usually reserved for cosmic-scale disasters. Is humanity capable of? The human looked at them, 200 of the galaxy's finest minds, all staring at her like she was a statistical impossibility that had achieved consciousness and enrolled in university. She started laughing again, not the suppressed amusement from earlier, but genuine, bewildered mirth. You really want to know? She asked, wiping moisture from her eyes. Another biological function that apparently involved secreting fluids for emotional regulation. The thing that should actually scare you about humans? The amphitheater held its breath, metaphorically speaking. We got bored of surviving, the human said. So we started exploring. We looked at the ocean, you know, the part of our planet that'll crush and drown you, and we built submarines to visit it. We looked at the sky and built aircraft. We looked at space and built rockets. We're not satisfied with adapting to our environment anymore. Now we adapt the environment to us. She smiled, and Kairesh finally understood what that expression really meant. Not friendliness, not reassurance, ambition. So yeah, the human continued, I came here to study exobiology because I wanted to understand what normal life looks like, because apparently we're not it. The military observer was speaking rapidly into their comm device. Professor Thelnick had sat down, her entire posture suggesting academic defeat. And Kairesh, her crystalline neural lattice reorganizing itself around this new reality, had only one thought. They've been here for 200 years. They've been diplomatic, peaceful, cooperative, and we never asked what they were capable of because we never imagined their homeworld was real. The human checked her chronometer. So, about that final exam. Do I still need to design a theoretical organism, or can I just describe my cousin's cat? Because that thing survives on spite and single-minded determination to knock objects off elevated surfaces, and honestly, it's a pretty good representation of Earth-based persistence. The administrative response arrived faster than academic bureaucracy had any right to move. Within the hour, the amphitheater had acquired 3 additional military observers, a diplomatic attaché from the Galactic Council, and what Kairesh's censors identified as a senior archivist from the Central Database Authority, the people responsible for cataloging every known world and species in charted space. They'd also acquired about 50 additional students who'd heard rumors and decided that skipping their own classes was worth witnessing whatever was happening in advanced exobiology. The human sat on the demonstration platform, legs dangling over the edge in a posture that suggested either complete comfort or tactical assessment of exit routes. Kairesh suspected both. "Let me see if I understand the situation," the diplomatic attaché said, their translation matrix rendering their species' bioluminescent communication into standard auditory language. Earth has been classified as a developing world under non-interference protocols for 2 centuries. During this time, it has also been used across 17 academic institutions as a theoretical model for extreme environment survival scenarios. "Sounds about right," the human confirmed. "And nobody," the attaché continued, their light patterns flickering with what might have been exasperation, thought to cross-reference these 2 databases? Professor Thelnix's vocal membranes produced a sound that wasn't quite language. The archivist stepped forward, projection equipment materializing data streams that made Kairesh's visual sensors struggle to process the information density. "The discrepancy originated here," the archivist explained, highlighting a timeline. "Initial survey of Sol system, 203 years ago. Planet 3, Earth, showed complex biosphere, pre-industrial civilization, standard developmental trajectory. Classified accordingly, placed under observation protocols. But the raw environmental data," one of the military observers interjected, "was flagged for academic study. Atmospheric composition, geological activity, radiation levels, all technically accurate, just interpreted as theoretical nightmare fuel instead of someone's actual living conditions," the human supplied helpfully. "Easy mistake. I mean, if you didn't know better, Earth does look aggressively hostile to life." The archivist's projection shifted, showing the dual classification paths. One database: Earth, developing world, primitive technology, maintain distance. Another database: Case Study 847 Terran, theoretical extreme environment, academic use only. "The data never contradicted itself," Kairesh said, her crystalline thoughts forming uncomfortable patterns. "We just never imagined both could be true simultaneously." "Why would you?" The human shrugged. "If someone told me there was a planet where the atmosphere was pure methane, the temperature never rose above -160 Celsius, and it rained liquid hydrocarbons, I'd assume it was lifeless too. Then I'd remember Titan exists, and there are probably microbes living there anyway, because extremophiles are like that." Genval, who had been silent for most of the administrative chaos, finally spoke. "You have a moon with those conditions?" "Saturn's moon, yeah. We've sent probes. Really interesting organic chemistry happening there." The human pulled up her datapad. "Although if we're talking about hostile moons, Europa's the one that'll keep you up at night. Subsurface ocean under kilometers of ice, possible hydrothermal activity, and if there's life down there, it's been evolving in complete darkness for billions of years. We're planning a drilling mission." The military observers exchanged glances that communicated volumes. One of them stepped forward, higher rank insignia than the others, Kairesh noted. "The Galactic Defense Consortium would like to request immediate reclassification of Earth," the senior officer stated. "Current designation as a developing world is insufficient." "Insufficient how?" the human asked, and there was an edge to her voice now. "Earth is not simply a world with challenging conditions. Based on what we've learned today, it's a planet that has been producing combat-optimized organisms for 4 billion years. The officer's species didn't have facial expressions, but their posture radiated military assessment. Your immune systems are weapons platforms. Your stress responses increase combat effectiveness. You heal from damage. You've colonized every available ecological niche on your planet, including the ones that should be uninhabitable." "We also write poetry and make art," the human countered. "We build cities and compose music and fall in love. We're not weapons." "No one is suggesting you are," the diplomatic attaché said quickly, their bioluminescence shifting to soothing colors. "But the classification system exists for a reason. Earth needs proper designation, and its inhabitants need what? Quarantine? A warning label?" The human's voice had gone quiet, which somehow seemed more dangerous than shouting. "We've been part of the galactic community for 200 years. We've followed every protocol, respected every boundary, contributed to scientific databases and cultural exchanges. And now you want to reclassify us because you finally did your homework?" Professor Thelnix moved forward, positioning herself between the human and the authorities, with the kind of protective instinct that transcended species. "My student raises a valid concern. Reclassification could impact Earth's diplomatic status, trade agreements, and future development." "It could also," the senior military officer said, "protect the galaxy from underestimating a species that has evolved to survive planetary-scale catastrophes." Kairesh watched the human's expression shift through several configurations. Anger, frustration, something that might have been resignation. Then, unexpectedly, calculation. "Okay," the human said. "Here's a counterproposal." The amphitheater went quiet. Even the newcomer students stopped their whispering. "You're right that the current classification is wrong. Earth isn't a standard developing world. We're too weird for that category." The human stood, and Kairesh was reminded that bipedal locomotion allowed for impressive verticality. "But reclassifying us as some kind of threat is also wrong. So instead, why don't we use this as an educational opportunity?" "Explain," the diplomatic attaché said. "I came here to study exobiology because I wanted to understand what baseline biology looks like. Turns out I'm the extreme case." The human gestured at the assembled academics and officials. "You've been teaching case study 847 Terran as theoretical horror for decades. Fine, let's make it practical instead." Professor Thelnix's vocal membranes vibrated with interest. I'm proposing I teach a course, Applied Survival Biology from a Human Perspective. Show students what Earth-level resilience actually looks like, how evolution works when the planet is actively trying to kill you, why all your theoretical models keep breaking when applied to real-world scenarios. The human's smile returned, sharp and ambitious. "You want to understand humans? Study us properly. Not as a threat, not as a curiosity, but as what we actually are, the product of 4 billion years of refusing to die quietly." The senior military officer considered this. "And in exchange? Earth stays classified as a developing world. We continue our path toward independent FTL. No quarantines, no restrictions, no panic about the scary Deathworlders." The human crossed her arms. "And maybe, just maybe, the rest of the galaxy learns something useful about adaptation, persistence, and why underestimating your environment is the fastest way to get naturally selected out of existence. Kairesh felt her neural lattice crystallizing around a new understanding. The human wasn't asking for acceptance or approval. She was negotiating from a position of strength, using the galaxy's own academic curiosity as leverage. The diplomatic attaché's bioluminescence flickered through several colors that Kairesh's translation matrix rendered as amused respect. "The council will need to deliberate." "Take your time," the human said. "I've got a final exam to ace." 3 weeks later, the Zenthari Academy course catalog updated with a new offering: Introduction to Baseline Survival Conditions, a comparative study. Instructor: the human's actual name, which Kairesh could finally access in the public directory. Prerequisites: completion of extreme environment biology or instructor approval. Warning: course material may challenge fundamental assumptions about viable biospheres. It became the most popular course in Academy history within the first enrollment cycle. It also achieved the distinction of highest failure rate. Turns out, understanding Earth-based biology required completely restructuring your conceptual framework for what survivable meant. Kairesh enrolled immediately. So did Vorn, Mirlan, and Genval. So did half the military. Observers, several diplomats, and the archivist who'd uncovered the classification error. The first lecture began with the human standing before a new amphitheater, even larger than the previous one, addressing 300 students who'd come to learn about the planet that had been hiding in plain sight. "Welcome to baseline biology," she said. "And yes, I'm calling it baseline, because from now on, we're going to recalibrate what you consider extreme. Earth isn't the exception. It's just the example you finally noticed." She pulled up a hologram of her homeworld, blue and white and green spinning peacefully. "This is my home. You've been calling it impossible for decades. I call it Tuesday." Her smile was sharp, professional, and absolutely uncompromising. "By the end of this course, you're going to understand why the most dangerous thing about humans isn't that we survived Earth. It's that we got bored of just surviving and decided to see what else was out there." She paused, letting that sink in. "Now, who wants to learn about persistence predation and why humans used to hunt prey by literally following them until they collapsed from exhaustion? Because we're going to need that context before we discuss marathon running, and trust me, you're going to want to sit down for this." Kairesh activated her recording equipment, her crystalline neural structure already reorganizing itself to accommodate new paradigms. Around her, 300 students settled in to learn about the planet they'd been studying wrong the entire time. The human's first lesson appeared on the display. Chapter 1. Why your definition of extreme is probably just our seasonal weather variation. Kairesh's thoughts crystallized into something that might have been excitement, might have been dread, but was definitely the beginning of understanding. The final test hadn't been designing an organism for Earth. It had been accepting that such organisms already existed, had achieved sapience, and were now teaching remedial biology to a galaxy that had accidentally categorized someone's homeroom as mythology. Outside the amphitheater, the administrative offices were already processing Earth's updated classification. Not as a death world, not as a developing primitive civilization, not as a threat or curiosity, just Earth, educational reference model, baseline comparative biology. Please note, actual inhabited world, exercise appropriate diplomatic protocols. Professor Thelnix, reviewing the new designation, produced a sound that her species made when confronting irony so profound it achieved philosophical weight. Somewhere on Earth, completely unaware of the academic chaos unfolding across the galaxy, someone was probably running a marathon. For fun, in suboptimal atmospheric conditions. Because it was Tuesday. The universe, Kairesh decided, had a deeply concerning sense of humor,